Leonardo DiCaprio survived a sinking ship and still had the audacity to argue with Kate Winslet about door space. He walked away from an actual bear attack, and the bear probably needed therapy afterwards, all for an Oscar. Ready for the moment that actually got him? On the set of The Wolf of Wall Street, Jonah Hill improvised one line, just one, mid-scene, entirely off the page. 70 pieces of raw yellowtail later, Leonardo DiCaprio was completely finished.
Scene between us, which is when we're eating the sushi and he slides me the note. It's a serious scene, and he's saying that he's wearing a wire, and it kind of represents the end of all we've built together and our friendship and everything. And it's a weird, sad scene, but we can't say what we're actually feeling. We have to have small talk, so we have to express it, with our faces and everything. So we're doing that scene. It's this really intense scene, and then at the end,
You stole.
Well, you're supposed to say. He was supposed to.
I was supposed to say, "Do you want that last piece of yellowtail?"
And I was supposed to say yes, and then eat it. But then I said, "No, buddy, it's all yours." And then so he had to eat it. So he had to match that take for the rest of the night. And eat about like 70 pieces of raw yellowtail.
Oh, yeah.
It's awesome.
And was throwing up into a trash can. And everyone was like, "Oh, Leo, are you okay?" And the only two people on the floor laughing were Scorsese and me.
DiCaprio has talked about it since, more than once, and every time the reaction sits somewhere between awe and mild trauma. He's called Hill one of the great improvisational actors he's ever shared a scene with, a compliment from a guy who spent 4 decades working across from some of the biggest names in the business, saved for the rare performance that actually earns it. That's the whole case, honestly, right there in one scene. A performer who can talk his way through 70 pieces of sushi and take down Leonardo DiCaprio in the process is playing a different game than most people working today. And that's just the opener. There's a lot more where that came from. So here's the actual question, the one worth sitting with for the next few minutes. Is Jonah Hill the funniest person in Hollywood? I've spent way too long looking into this one. Get comfortable. Let's build the case. Before any of the movies, Jonah Hill was a broke kid in New York, writing his own weird little plays and performing them in a dive bar in the East Village, mostly for friends. His first real break arrived almost by accident. A friend's famous father caught wind of some elaborate prank phone calls Hill had been making just for fun, found them hilarious, and got him an audition for his first movie. That's the whole origin story. A kid being funny enough to the right person at exactly the right moment. That was 2004. 3 years later, Jonah Hill wanted one specific role in one specific movie, and the people making it kept turning him down. Seth Rogen had written a script about 2 teenage best friends surviving one wild night before college, and Hill kept campaigning for the lead. The response, more or less, he looked too old for the part. He was in his early 20s, auditioning to play a 17-year-old. So he went away, shaved properly, sent in a tape, and somehow the math worked out. Try picturing anyone else in that role now. Michael Cera, playing his best friend, has looked back at old footage of the two of them and basically described watching a 19-year-old kid get treated with far more patience than he probably deserved. Emma Stone, barely out of her teens herself, spent one entire kissing scene getting headbutted mid-take because Hill committed so hard to playing convincingly drunk that basic coordination went out the window. The scene made the final cut anyway. Here's the detail that really sums up the whole set. The kid cast as McLovin, Christopher Mintz-Plasse, genuinely irritated Hill during auditions. Hill pushed back on the casting. The director leaned into it completely instead. The friction was the whole point, exactly why the casting made sense. Real irritation, aimed at a total stranger, became the whole joke instead of a problem to fix. All of it read as lived in rather than written, too. Every awkward pause, every too long tangent, every ridiculous conversation about teenage nonsense felt like something that actually happened between 2 real friends, because in a lot of ways it basically did. Hill and his co-writers leaned hard into their own teenage years for the material. Audiences connected with it instantly, and plenty of viewers well under the movie's rating found their way in anyway, passing it around like contraband. People still quote lines from it at parties, at work, completely out of context 2 decades later. That kind of staying power is rare for any comedy, let alone one built largely on a 23-year-old's fight to prove he belonged in it. Superbad turned into one of the defining comedies of its decade, and Jonah Hill carried half its most quotable lines, and this was still the warm-up. Fast forward to 2012. Jonah Hill gets paired with Channing Tatum, built like an action figure, cast as the meathead jock who trips over his own charm. On paper, a simple contrast. In practice, something bigger happened. Watch any interview the two of them ever did together for Jump Street. Watch what happens to Tatum's face. His composure lasts about 90 seconds once Hill starts talking. Tops. Red carpets, late-night couches, junkets, some stray comment lands, and Tatum folds over laughing, wiping his eyes, completely useless for the rest of the segment. At an award show around the second film's release, Hill stood in front of a room full of cameras and told everyone Tatum was the funniest co-star he'd ever worked with. Full stop. High praise from someone who'd spent his whole career around professional comedians. Tatum returned it plenty of times too, describing how Hill finds the real emotional truth of a scene through his whole body first, his physicality carrying as much weight as the line reading. Genuine mutual respect, stated plainly, more than once. Then there's the drug sequence in the first movie. Several straight minutes of physical comedy so committed it looks genuinely dangerous. Half the crew reportedly struggled to keep it together behind the camera. There's a rhythm to it, watching those two together. Hill throws something out, half-formed, almost thinking out loud, and Tatum's whole face changes before he even finishes the sentence. It's the opposite of practiced. Two performers who've clearly run out of planned ways to surprise each other, so whatever's underneath just leaks out instead, on camera, in front of a room full of journalists whose actual question has been completely forgotten. Somewhere in the middle of all that box office success, an unmistakable friendship formed on camera, in real time, across two movies. Two guys who actually enjoy being around each other. Rarer on a film set than people assume. By that same stretch of his career, Hill was also playing an exaggerated, fame-obsessed version of himself in an apocalypse comedy alongside half his real-life friend group, volunteering to be the most insufferable possible version of his own public image, on purpose, for laughs. Range, basically, in both directions at once. Here's where the case gets serious, because making people laugh is one thing, but earning Martin Scorsese's trust is an entirely different achievement. One scene in The Wolf of Wall Street took more than 20 takes to get right. Scorsese, the man behind Goodfellas, Taxi Driver, a filmography most directors would trade a limb for, just sat there, silent, newspaper open, letting Hill work it out for himself. Hill has called it terrifying in the moment, and the best lesson he ever got in hindsight. Bring that back to the sushi scene from the opening. Same movie, same director, the same level of trust. Scorsese let Hill run wild with an improvised bit, watched DiCaprio suffer through take after take of raw fish, and kept every single one rolling because the comedy earned it. A legendary director, protecting a joke about sushi like it mattered. And that same performance, unhinged, chaotic, sushi and all, earned Jonah Hill his second Oscar nomination. His first came a couple years earlier for playing a quiet, restrained baseball analyst about as far from Seth from Superbad as a person can travel. One actor, one decade, landing both performances in the room with the little gold statue. Sit with that for a second. The stoner best friend from Superbad, the guy who improvised his way through a Scorsese classic, also delivered something calm and dramatically serious enough that awards voters took him seriously, on two completely different occasions. Funny people exist everywhere in this industry. The ones who also hold their own across from DiCaprio and Scorsese, twice nominated for the biggest prize in the business, belong to a much smaller club. The relationship with Scorsese carried past acting too. A few years later, when Hill stepped behind the camera to direct his first film, a quiet coming-of-age story, a total departure from stoner comedy, Scorsese was one of the people he called for advice. Scorsese told him to have the young cast play a fight scene for real instead of faking the choreography, a risky note from an actual filmmaking legend. Hill took the advice. The scene worked. Scorsese later admitted it was a wild note to hand a first-time director. Coming from Scorsese himself, that's basically a compliment wrapped in a warning. Here's the part that explains why any of this actually connects, instead of just being noise. A few years back, Hill turned the camera on himself and made a documentary about his own therapist. Sitting there, fully exposed, talking through grief, body image, the loss of his older brother, zero jokes to hide behind. Critics responded to it as something unexpected and quietly powerful, a real gear shift for a guy known mostly for jokes. He's talked openly about growing up heavier, about the industry's running commentary on his body, about the strange exhaustion of feeling frozen at 14 years old long after everything around him changed. Eventually, he stepped back from talking about himself in public for a while. Fair enough, honestly. These days, he mostly talks about it in the past tense, like a weather system that finally passed. That alone is its own kind of punchline. The class clown spent 2 decades being the funniest person in the room, partly to control how people saw his body. And once that pressure lifted, the comedy actually got sharper. Here's the thing though, that same guy, carrying all of that, still went right back to inventing Morgan Freeman impressions and making Channing Tatum lose it on camera every chance he got. The vulnerability and the chaos live in the same person at the same time, and one probably feeds the other. It shows up in his recent work too. On a star-studded satire from around that same period, the director handed him a rare amount of creative freedom, full improvisation, on camera, addressing the audience directly. The kind of trust directors save for very few actors. That same director has called Hill one of the great improvisers working in film today. A plain, direct compliment, delivered completely straight. Scorsese, watching Hill's directing work years later, called it something worth being proud of. A real compliment, coming from a filmmaker who's handed out plenty of them and meant very few. So here's the actual tally. A world-class director who let scenes run wild for him. A movie star who ate 70 pieces of sushi and still lost. A co-star who loses a straight face within a minute of the cameras rolling. 2 Oscar nominations sitting next to a filmography full of stoners, cops, and arms dealers. A therapy documentary that made professional critics tear up. Robin Williams brought a kind of magic the industry still measures itself against. Jonah Hill brings something a little different. A guy who makes the sushi scene and the therapy documentary feel like honest work from the exact same person. Different eras, different styles, same basic gift, making an entire room forget itself for a few minutes, then walking away like it was effortless. Funniest in Hollywood is a massive claim. Take another look at the evidence, and when you've made up your mind, say so in the comments. Funniest in the business, or somebody else entirely, your call. That's the exact kind of case Savage Jackie builds every single week. Subscribe and keep up with everything else happening across Hollywood and the wider world of show business.